What if one simple question could unravel the most guarded heart on Wall Street? What if 5 words whispered by a complete stranger could bring a $1 billion empire to its knees, not through destruction, but through something far more powerful, genuine human connection? Marcus Chun had built his fortune by reading people like stock reports, predicting their moves before they knew them themselves. He had conquered boardrooms, crushed competitors, and accumulated wealth beyond imagination. But on a cold Tuesday morning in November, standing in the middle of Central Park with tears he couldn't explain running down his cheeks, he was about to discover that all his power meant nothing when faced with something he had forgotten existed. Sarah Martinez wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be at her dead-end job, serving coffee to ungrateful customers for minimum wage. But life had other plans, and sometimes the universe conspires in the most unexpected ways. When she saw the man in the expensive suit crying alone on a park bench, she felt something her grandmother had taught her, that kindness costs nothing but can save everything. Neither of them knew that this chance encounter would trigger a chain of events so extraordinary that it would make international headlines, reshape an entire corporation, and prove that even in our disconnected world, one moment of authentic human compassion can change absolutely everything. This is that story. This is what happens when a billionaire discovers he's been living someone else's life, and a minimum wage worker shows him what it means to be truly wealthy. This is the story of how 5 simple words spoken by a stranger became the most expensive question ever asked, not in money, but in the courage it takes to completely rebuild yourself from the ground up. The question was simple. I think you need a hug, may I? The answer would cost Marcus Chun everything he thought he wanted and give him everything he never knew he needed. Point 7 Marcus Chun had always believed that Tuesday mornings were for conquering the world. At least, that's what he told himself as he stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Chun Financial Tower, watching the city wake up beneath him like an anthill of ambition and desperation. The view from his window stretched across Manhattan, a concrete jungle that had bowed to his will for the past 15 years. At 38, he controlled assets worth over $3 billion, employed 12,000 people across 4 continents, and could make or break careers with a single phone call. But on this particular Tuesday morning in November, as frost painted delicate patterns on his floor-to-ceiling windows, Marcus felt something he couldn't quite name gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. It was like a persistent itch in a place he couldn't reach, a whisper in a language he had forgotten how to speak. He attributed it to the stress of the upcoming merger with Steinberg Holdings, a deal that would add another $700 million to his portfolio and cement his position as one of the youngest financial titans in American history. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk that cost more than most people's annual salary. The display showed 13 missed calls from his assistant, Rebecca, and 27 new emails that required his immediate attention. Each notification was another demand on his time, another decision that could impact thousands of jobs, millions of dollars, countless lives. The weight of it all sat on his shoulders like a lead blanket, familiar and suffocating. Mr. Chun, Rebecca's voice crackled through the intercom, professional and efficient as always. She had worked for him for 8 years, scheduling his life down to the minute, managing his calendar like a military operation. Your breakfast meeting with the Japanese investors is in 20 minutes. The car is waiting downstairs. Marcus stared at his reflection in the window glass, seeing the face of a stranger wearing his expensive suit. His black hair was perfectly styled, his tie knotted with precision, his shoes polished to mirror brightness. Everything about his appearance screamed success, control, dominance. But his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a man who had climbed so high he had forgotten how to come down, so focused on the destination that he had lost track of the journey. Cancel it, he heard himself say, the words surprising him as much as they apparently surprised Rebecca. Sir, cancel the meeting with Tanaka Industries? But this deal has been months in the making. They flew in specifically to, I said cancel it. His voice carried the authority that had built his empire, but underneath, it was something else, something that sounded almost like panic. Cancel everything for today. I need some air. The silence on the other end of the intercom stretched for several seconds before Rebecca's carefully controlled voice responded. "Of course, Mr. Chun. Should I reschedule for tomorrow?" "I don't know," Marcus said, and realized he meant it. For the first time in his adult life, he genuinely didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and the uncertainty was both terrifying and strangely liberating. He left his office without another word, walking past the gallery of awards and photographs that documented his rise to power. There was Marcus shaking hands with senators, signing billion-dollar contracts, ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. In every photo, he wore the same confident smile, the same predatory gleam in his eyes. The man in those pictures looked like he knew exactly who he was and where he was going. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt like descending from heaven into purgatory. Each floor he passed was filled with people whose lives he controlled, whose mortgages and children's educations depended on his decisions. The weight of their collective trust pressed down on him like the ocean pressing down on a deep-sea diver. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, he could barely breathe. The doorman nodded respectfully as Marcus pushed through the revolving doors into the crisp November air. The city assaulted his senses immediately. Car horns honking, construction workers shouting, the smell of hot dog vendors, and exhaust fumes. After years of traveling from climate-controlled office to climate-controlled car to climate-controlled restaurant, the raw reality of street-level existence felt like a slap in the face. He walked without direction, his $1,000 shoes clicking against the sidewalk in rhythm with his heartbeat. People moved around him like water around a stone, their faces focused on their own destinations, their own problems. He envied them, their simplicity, their apparent contentment with ordinary lives and ordinary dreams. Central Park appeared before him like an oasis in the urban desert. He had driven past it thousands of times, but had never actually walked through it, never sat on its benches or fed its pigeons or watched children play on its swings. The park represented something he had sacrificed on his climb to the top. Time, peace, the simple pleasure of existing without purpose or agenda. He found himself on a path that wound through a grove of bare trees, their skeletal branches reaching toward the gray sky like desperate fingers. A few joggers passed him, breathing heavily in the cold air, their faces flushed with exertion and something that looked like joy. When was the last time he had felt joy? When was the last time he had run anywhere except toward another deal, another acquisition, another victory? The bench appeared at a bend in the path, weathered wood and wrought iron that had probably hosted 10,000 conversations, 10,000 moments of human connection. Marcus sat down without thinking, his expensive coat spreading around him like wings. The metal was cold against his back, seeping through the fabric of his jacket and shirt to his skin underneath. That's when the tears started. They came without warning, without apparent cause, rising from some deep well inside him that he had sealed off years ago. They rolled down his cheeks and dripped onto his silk tie, each droplet carrying away another piece of the carefully constructed facade he had built around himself. He couldn't remember the last time he had cried. Maybe at his father's funeral 12 years ago. Maybe not even then. There had been too many people watching, too many business associates who needed to see strength, control, the unbreakable will that had made him who he was. But here, alone on a park bench with only the bare trees as witnesses, the dam finally burst. Every suppressed emotion, every buried doubt, every moment of loneliness he had pushed aside came flooding out in a torrent of salt water and broken breathing. He cried for the father who had built a business empire, but had never learned how to build a relationship with his son. He cried for the mother who had died when he was 16, taking with her the last person who had loved him for who he was rather than what he could do for them. He cried for the friends he had left behind in his climb to the top, the relationships he had sacrificed on the altar of success, the woman who had loved him once, but couldn't compete with his ambition. He cried for the children he would probably never have, too busy building monuments to his own ego to build a family. Most of all, he cried for the boy he had been, full of dreams and hopes and the innocent belief that money and power would make him happy. The sobs shook his entire body, years of suppressed grief and disappointment pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. His carefully styled hair fell into his face, his perfect posture crumbled, his composed mask slipped completely away. For the first time in decades, Marcus Chun was not a billionaire, not a corporate titan, not a master of the universe. He was just a broken man on a park bench, crying for everything he had gained and everything he had lost. He was so lost in his grief that he didn't notice the woman approaching until her shadow fell across his face. She was small and slight, wearing a faded denim jacket and sneakers that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes held a warmth that seemed to radiate actual heat in the cold November air. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the kind of face that was pretty in an understated way, like a wildflower growing beside a highway. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the billionaire in his $1,000 suit and the working-class girl in her thrift store clothes. She should have walked away, should have minded her own business, should have followed the unwritten rules of city life that said you don't get involved with strangers, especially strange men crying on park benches. Instead, she sat down beside him. "Rough morning?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent that he couldn't place, something warm and musical that made him think of southern kitchens and Sunday dinners. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, suddenly aware of how he must look. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." He trailed off, unsure how to explain what he didn't understand himself. "No need to apologize," she said gently. "Sometimes we all need a good cry. I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Martinez." "Marcus," he replied automatically, then realized he had given only his first name. When was the last time he had introduced himself without his title, his company, his credentials? When was the last time he had been just Marcus? Sarah nodded, as if his name was perfectly ordinary, as if she had no idea she was sitting next to one of the most powerful men in the country. "You know what, Marcus?" she said, studying his face with those warm brown eyes. "I think you need a hug. May I?" The question hung in the air between them, like a bridge spanning two completely different worlds. On one side was everything Marcus had built, his empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed identity as a man who needed nothing from anyone. On the other side was this stranger, this woman who had appeared out of nowhere offering the one thing he had forgotten he was missing. In the boardroom, Marcus could analyze 1,000 variables in seconds, could see the angles and implications of any proposition. But faced with Sarah's simple offer of human kindness, his calculating mind went completely blank. All he could do was nod, a small movement that felt like the most important decision he had ever made. Sarah scooted closer on the bench and wrapped her arms around him, pulling his head down to her shoulder. She smelled like vanilla and laundry detergent and something indefinably comforting like home was supposed to smell. Her embrace was gentle but firm, patient but present, asking for nothing but offering everything. And Marcus Chun, master of the universe, began to cry again. But these tears were different, softer somehow, as if something frozen inside him was finally beginning to thaw. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had touched him with genuine affection, since someone had offered comfort without expecting something in return. They sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, two strangers connected by nothing more than shared humanity. Traffic moved past on the nearby street. Other park visitors walked by on the path. The world continued its relentless forward motion. But on that bench, time seemed suspended, as if the universe had paused to allow for this moment of unexpected grace. When Marcus finally pulled back, he felt emptied out, but somehow lighter, as if he had set down a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. Sarah's eyes searched his face with genuine concern, and he found himself looking into them with an intensity that would have made his business rivals uncomfortable. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate but sincere. "I don't know why you did that, but thank you." Sarah smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. My grandmother always said that kindness is free but priceless. Besides, everyone needs a hug sometimes, even successful-looking guys in fancy suits. If she only knew, Marcus thought. If she only knew that the man she had just comforted could buy and sell city blocks, could make phone calls that would shift stock markets, could write checks that would change lives. But somehow, sitting here with her simple warmth, none of that seemed to matter. "What do you do?" he asked, genuinely curious about this woman who had appeared in his darkest moment, like an angel in disguise. "I work at a coffee shop downtown," Sarah replied without embarrassment. "The daily grind on 5th Street. It's not much, but it pays the bills mostly. I'm saving up for nursing school, trying to make something better of myself." The irony was almost overwhelming. Here was a woman making probably $15 an hour, living paycheck to paycheck, dreaming of a career that would help other people heal. And she was the one offering comfort to a man who could have bought her coffee shop as casually as ordering lunch. The contrast between her genuine contentment and his manufactured misery was like a mirror showing him everything wrong with his priorities. "Nursing is a noble profession," he said, and meant it. Helping people heal, making a real difference in their lives. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What do you do that's got you crying on park benches?" Marcus hesitated. How could he explain his world to someone like her? How could he describe the pressure, the isolation, the hollow victory of having everything and feeling empty? "I work in finance," he said finally, the understatement of the century. Sarah nodded, as if that explained everything. "Money can be stressful," she said with the wisdom of someone who had worried about every dollar. "But it's just money, you know? It can't buy the things that really matter." Coming from anyone else, the words would have sounded naive, condescending even. But coming from Sarah, sitting on a park bench in her second-hand clothes with her dreams of helping others, they carried a weight of truth that hit him like a physical blow. She was right, of course. All his wealth hadn't bought him peace, hadn't bought him love, hadn't bought him the kind of simple human connection that she had given him freely in the space of a few minutes. "You're very wise," he said, and she laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "My mom would disagree with you there. She thinks I'm too trusting, too willing to help strangers. Says it's going to get me in trouble someday." "Maybe," Marcus said, thinking about how her willingness to help a stranger had already changed his entire day, possibly his entire perspective. Or maybe it's going to save someone who really needs saving. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the park come to life around them. Joggers passed by, dog walkers led their charges to favorite spots. Mothers pushed strollers along the winding paths. It was a symphony of ordinary life, the kind of everyday existence that Marcus had observed from his tower, but never participated in. "I should probably get going," Sarah said eventually, glancing at a watch that looked like it had cost about $20. "I've got to work a double shift today, and my boss doesn't believe in excuses, even good ones." Marcus felt a sudden panic at the thought of her leaving, as if she might take with her the only genuine connection he had made in years. "Could I?" he started, then stopped, unsure how to ask what he wanted to ask. "Could I see you again? Maybe buy you coffee sometime?" Sarah studied his face with those perceptive brown eyes, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through him, past the expensive suit and practiced confidence to the lonely man underneath. "I'd like that," she said finally. "But I make the coffee, remember? How about you come by the daily grind sometime? I'll make you the best cup you've ever had." "I'd like that," Marcus said, and realized he meant it more than he had meant anything in years. "I like that very much." Sarah stood up and brushed invisible dust from her jeans, a gesture so unconsciously graceful that it made his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Take care of yourself, Marcus," she said. "And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help when you need it." She walked away without looking back, her ponytail swaying with each step, her worn sneakers silent on the asphalt path. Marcus watched until she disappeared around a bend, then sat alone on the bench for another hour, thinking about everything that had just happened and everything that might happen next. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Chun had no idea what the future held. His phone was buzzing constantly in his pocket, undoubtedly with urgent messages from his assistant, his lawyers, his business partners. Deals were waiting to be closed, fortunes were waiting to be made, an empire was waiting for its emperor to return. But as he finally stood up and began to walk back to his tower, Marcus found himself thinking not about profit margins and acquisition targets, but about a woman named Sarah who worked at a coffee shop and dreamed of healing people. He thought about her offer of a hug, her simple wisdom about money, her grandmother's belief that kindness was free but priceless. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had asked him if he needed help, how long since anyone had seen him as just Marcus rather than Marcus Chun, financial titan. He thought about how good it had felt to cry, to let down his guard, to accept comfort from a stranger who had nothing to gain from his vulnerability. As the Chun Financial Tower came into view, its glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a monument to ambition, Marcus made a decision that would have shocked his board of directors, his competitors, and probably himself if he had thought about it too carefully. He was going to see Sarah Martinez again. He was going to drink her coffee and listen to her stories, and maybe, if he was very lucky, learn from her how to be the kind of person who offered hugs to crying strangers in parks. He didn't know it yet, but that decision would change everything. For him, for her, for the thousands of people whose lives their story would eventually touch. Because sometimes the most important journeys begin not with a dramatic gesture or a grand plan, but with a simple question asked by someone brave enough to care about a stranger's pain. "I think you need a hug," she had said. "May I?" And in saying yes, Marcus Chun had started down a path that would lead him away from everything he thought he wanted and toward everything he had never known he needed. 3 days passed before Marcus found the courage to walk through the doors of the daily grind. 3 days of board meetings and conference calls, of pretending that nothing had changed while everything inside him felt fundamentally different. He had tried to dismiss the encounter in the park as a momentary weakness, a stress-induced breakdown that meant nothing in the grand scheme of his carefully ordered life. But every quiet moment brought back the memory of Sarah's arms around him, the unexpected comfort of her presence, the simple wisdom in her words about money and what really mattered. The daily grind sat wedged between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore on 5th Street, the kind of neighborhood that gentrification hadn't quite reached yet. The storefront was narrow and unremarkable, with hand-painted letters on the window and a few small tables visible through the glass. It was exactly the kind of place that Marcus would normally have walked past without noticing, the kind of establishment that existed below the radar of his rarefied world. But now, standing across the street in his charcoal gray suit and Italian leather shoes, Marcus felt more nervous than he had before his first billion-dollar presentation. His palms were sweating, his carefully rehearsed opening lines kept evaporating from his mind, and he found himself checking his reflection in store windows like a teenager preparing for a first date. The morning rush had ended, leaving the coffee shop relatively quiet as Marcus finally crossed the street and pushed open the door. A bell chimed overhead, announcing his arrival with a cheerful ding that seemed to echo in the sudden stillness that followed. The interior was warm and cluttered in a way that spoke of genuine use rather than designer aesthetic. Mismatched chairs surrounded scarred wooden tables. Local artwork covered the walls, and the air was thick with the rich scent of coffee beans and fresh pastries. And there behind the counter was Sarah. She looked up from the espresso machine she was cleaning, and her face lit up with a smile that made something in Marcus's chest flutter like a bird trying to escape. She was wearing a green apron over jeans and a simple white t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back with what looked like a pencil, and she looked more beautiful to him in that moment than any of the polished society women he had dated over the years. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying genuine pleasure at seeing him. "You actually came." "I said I would," he replied, trying to project more confidence than he felt. The coffee shop was small enough that his presence seemed to fill the entire space, and he became acutely aware of how out of place he looked among the worn furniture and casual atmosphere. "Well, welcome to my kingdom," Sarah said with a self-deprecating laugh. gesturing around the modest space. "It's not much, but it's honest work, and the coffee really is good. What can I get you?" Marcus approached the counter, studying the handwritten menu board with its reasonable prices and simple offerings. In his world, coffee came from $1,000 machines operated by uniformed staff in gleaming corporate kitchens. The idea of ordering from a menu where the most expensive item cost $4 felt almost surreal. "Surprise me," he said, settling onto one of the stools at the counter. "You said you'd make me the best cup I've ever had." Sarah's eyes sparkled with what looked like mischief. "Big claim, I know, but I've got secret weapons." She began moving around behind the counter with practiced efficiency, grinding beans with an old machine that sounded like it had been working steadily for decades. "So how have you been? You look better than you did on Tuesday." Marcus considered the question seriously. How had he been? Different, unsettled, strangely aware of things he had never noticed before. Since their encounter in the park, he found himself actually seeing the faces of people who worked in his building, wondering about their lives beyond their job functions. He had caught himself staring out his office window, not at the cityscape he commanded, but at the tiny figures moving along the sidewalks far below, each one carrying their own hopes and struggles and stories. "Better," he said finally, "that day in the park. It helped more than you probably know." Sarah glanced over at him while she worked, her movements fluid and economical. Sometimes we all need to let it out. There's no shame in crying, despite what society tells men about keeping it all bottled up inside. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled as she coaxed it into producing what smelled like liquid heaven. Marcus watched her work, fascinated by her obvious pride in what she was doing. Every movement had purpose, every step in the process received her complete attention. It was craftsmanship in its purest form, taking simple ingredients and transforming them through skill and care into something greater than the sum of their parts. "There you go," Sarah said, sliding a white ceramic mug across the counter. "One daily grind special, made with love and a little bit of magic." Marcus lifted the mug and inhaled. The aroma was incredible, rich and complex with notes of chocolate and something he couldn't quite identify, but that made him think of warm autumn evenings and contentment. He took a careful sip and felt his eyes widen in surprise. It was, without exaggeration, the best coffee he had ever tasted. Smooth and bold without being bitter, sweet without being cloying, with a finish that lingered pleasantly on his tongue. In his corporate world, coffee was fuel consumed quickly and efficiently to maintain productivity. This was something else entirely, an experience, a moment of pure sensory pleasure. "This is incredible," he said, and Sarah beamed at the praise. "Told you so. The secret is in the beans. I get them from a small farm in Guatemala that my friend Rose's family runs. They're not certified organic because the certification costs too much, but they're grown with more love and care than any commercial operation. Plus, I add just a tiny bit of cinnamon and vanilla to bring out the natural flavors." "Your friend Rosa?" Marcus asked, curious about this glimpse into Sarah's life. "Yeah, she used to work here until she saved up enough to go back to school. We keep in touch, and she helps me get the good stuff direct from her family's farm. It costs more than buying from the big distributors, but quality matters, you know?" Marcus nodded, though the concept of choosing quality over profit margins was foreign to his business experience. In his world, efficiency and cost reduction were paramount. The idea of paying more for something simply because it was better, with no guarantee of increased revenue, seemed almost radical. "How did you learn to make coffee like this?" he asked. Sarah's face softened with memory. "My grandmother, actually. She came here from Colombia when she was young, and she brought her coffee traditions with her. She used to say that coffee was like a conversation. It required patience, attention, and respect for both the ingredients and the person you were serving. I spent my childhood watching her make coffee for neighbors and friends, and it was always more than just a drink. It was connection, community, care made tangible." As if summoned by their conversation, the bell over the door chimed, and an elderly man shuffled in. He was probably in his 70s, with weathered hands and kind eyes behind thick glasses. His clothes had seen better days, but they were clean and carefully maintained. "Morning, Mr. Peterson," Sarah called out cheerfully. "The usual?" "If you don't mind, dear," the man replied, settling carefully onto a stool 2 seats down from Marcus. "And maybe one of those blueberry muffins if you've got any left." Sarah was already reaching for a mug, clearly knowing exactly how Mr. Peterson liked his coffee. As she prepared his order, she kept up a steady stream of conversation about his garden, his cat, his grandson's upcoming visit. It was obvious that she knew details about his life that went far beyond his coffee preferences, and that he looked forward to these daily interactions as much as the caffeine. "Here you go, Mr. P," Sarah said, sliding the coffee and a muffin across the counter. "On the house today, that muffin's from yesterday, and I can't sell day-old pastries with a clear conscience." "You're too good to me, Sarah," Mr. Peterson protested, but he was smiling as he said it. "What did I do to deserve such kindness?" "You exist, and you're a good man," Sarah replied simply. "That's enough." Marcus watched this interaction with growing fascination. In his world, every gesture was calculated, every kindness had an angle, every relationship served a purpose. But Sarah's generosity toward the old man was clearly genuine, with no expectation of return or recognition. She was losing money on the free muffin, spending valuable time on conversation that didn't increase her productivity, and she was doing it all because it was the right thing to do. After Mr. Peterson settled at a corner table with his breakfast, Sarah turned her attention back to Marcus. "Sorry about that. We get a pretty regular crowd of neighborhood folks, and I like to think we're more than just a coffee shop. We're kind of like a community center, you know? A place where people can connect, where everyone's welcome regardless of how much money they have in their wallet." "Does that approach work financially?" Marcus asked, his business instincts automatically analyzing the economic model. "Giving away free food, spending time on conversation instead of turning tables?" Sarah laughed, but not mockingly, spoken like someone who understands business. "Honestly, we're not getting rich here, but we're sustainable, and more importantly, we're building something that matters. Our regulars are incredibly loyal. They choose us over the big chains, even when it's less convenient, because they know we care about them as people, not just as customers." The concept was so foreign to Marcus's experience that it took him a moment to process. In his companies, customer loyalty was purchased through marketing campaigns and competitive pricing. The idea that it could be earned through genuine personal connection seemed almost naive, yet the evidence was right in front of him. Despite its modest appearance and lack of corporate backing, the daily grind was clearly thriving in its own small way. "Tell me about nursing school," he said, changing the subject to something that felt safer than examining his own business practices too closely. "When do you start?" Sarah's face lit up with excitement and determination. "If everything goes according to plan, next fall. I've been saving every penny I can, and I'm about halfway to what I need for tuition. It's going to be tight. I'll have to work part-time while I'm in school, and I'll probably be living on ramen noodles for 2 years, but it'll be worth it." "What draws you to nursing?" Marcus found himself genuinely curious about her motivations, so different from his own drive for wealth and power. "I want to help people heal," Sarah said without hesitation. "I want to be there for families during their worst moments and help them find hope. I want to use my hands to ease pain and my heart to ease fear. Money's nice, and nurses do make a decent living, but that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I can't imagine anything more meaningful than being part of someone else's healing journey." The sincerity in her voice was overwhelming. Marcus had spent his career surrounded by people motivated by profit, market share, competitive advantage. He had been in countless meetings where the discussion centered on maximizing returns and minimizing costs, where human concerns were reduced to statistics on spreadsheets. Sitting across from Sarah, hearing her talk about her dreams with such pure purpose, he felt like he was seeing a completely different way of existing in the world. "That's beautiful," he said, and meant it. "The world needs more people like you." "The world needs more people who remember that we're all connected," Sarah replied. Money comes and goes, jobs change, possessions break or get lost. But the kindness we show each other, the care we give, the love we share, that stuff lasts forever. Before Marcus could respond, the door chimed again, and a young mother entered, pushing a stroller with one hand while trying to manage a toddler with the other. The child was having some kind of meltdown, crying loudly and refusing to cooperate, and the mother looked frazzled and embarrassed. "Oh, honey, it's okay," Sarah said immediately, coming around the counter to help. She knelt down to the toddler's level, speaking in soothing tones. "Hey there, buddy. Rough morning? I bet you're hungry. Mom, why don't you sit down and I'll bring you something? Coffee's on me. You look like you could use it." The transformation was remarkable. Within minutes, Sarah had the toddler calm down with a small cup of milk and a cookie. The mother settled at a table with coffee and a supportive ear, and the entire atmosphere in the shop had shifted from tense to welcoming. Other customers, instead of being annoyed by the disruption, seemed charmed by Sarah's handling of the situation. Marcus watched all of this with growing amazement. This wasn't customer service as he understood it. This was something deeper, more fundamental. Sarah wasn't just selling coffee. She was creating a space where people felt valued, supported, cared for. She was building community one interaction at a time, one small kindness at a time. "You're remarkable," he said when she returned to the counter. "The way you handled that, the way you handle everyone who comes in here. It's like you see something in people that they might not even see in themselves." Sarah blushed slightly at the praise. "I just treat people the way I'd want to be treated if I was having a hard day. We're all struggling with something, you know? Sometimes a little kindness is all it takes to turn someone's day around. Is that what you did for me in the park?" Marcus asked quietly. "Turn my day around? I don't know," Sarah said, studying his face with those perceptive brown eyes. "Did I?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Had she turned his day around? His week? His entire perspective on what mattered in life? "I think you might have turned more than just my day around," he admitted. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said, about kindness being free but priceless, about money not buying the things that really matter. And what do you think really matters?" Sarah asked. The question hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Marcus had spent his entire adult life believing that what mattered was success, achievement, the accumulation of wealth, and power. But sitting in this small coffee shop, watching Sarah create magic through simple acts of kindness, he was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about what made a life worth living. "I'm starting to think," he said slowly, "that what really matters is how we treat each other, how we show up for people when they need us, how we use whatever gifts we have to make the world a little bit better." Sarah smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Now you're getting it," she said. "And you know what? I think you've got more gifts than you realize. I saw something in you that day in the park, something real and beautiful underneath all that sadness and stress. Whatever you do for work, whatever pressure you're under, don't let it bury that part of yourself. The world needs more people who are willing to be vulnerable, who are willing to cry when they need to cry, and ask for help when they need help." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were so true. He had spent years building walls around himself, creating an image of invulnerability that had become a prison. Sarah had seen through those walls in minutes, had recognized the frightened, lonely man hiding behind the facade of success. "I don't know how to be that person," he admitted. "I don't know how to be vulnerable in a world that sees vulnerability as weakness." "Start small," Sarah suggested. "Start with one person at a time. Be real with someone who matters to you. Tell someone you care about them. Ask someone how they're really doing, and then actually listen to the answer. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes incredible strength to let people see who you really are." Marcus finished his coffee, savoring the last sips of what had been more than just a beverage. It had been an education, a revelation, a doorway into a different way of seeing the world. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. If money wasn't an issue, if you could do anything with your life, what would you do?" Sarah's eyes got a dreamy, distant look. "I'd open a healing center," she said without hesitation. Not just medical healing, but emotional, spiritual, community healing. A place where people could come when they were hurting, where they could find not just treatment, but connection. Where the coffee would be free, the conversation would be real, and everyone would be welcome regardless of their circumstances. That sounds incredible, Marcus said, and found himself imagining such a place, envisioning the impact it could have on countless lives. Pipe dreams, Sarah said with a self-deprecating laugh. But a girl's got a dream, right? Maybe someday, when I've saved up enough money and learned enough about healing, I'll make it happen. Marcus pulled out his wallet to pay for the coffee, and Sarah waved him off. First cup's always free for new friends, she said. That's the daily grind policy. Then, I'll have to come back soon, Marcus said, standing up from his stool, to pay for this one properly. I'd like that, Sarah said, and the warmth in her voice made his heart do that complicated flutter again. As Marcus walked toward the door, he turned back for one last look at Sarah, who was already greeting the next customer with the same genuine warmth she had shown him. The late morning sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating her face and making her look almost ethereal, like an angel disguised as a barista. Outside on the sidewalk, Marcus stood for a moment in the crisp November air, processing everything that had just happened. He had entered the daily grind as a successful businessman seeking a simple cup of coffee. He was leaving as something else entirely, a man whose understanding of success, of meaning, of what it meant to be truly wealthy, had been fundamentally challenged. His phone buzzed with urgent messages, reminding him that he had a lunch meeting with potential investors, an afternoon conference call with his board of directors, an evening reception for industry leaders. The machinery of his empire demanded his attention, required his presence, expected his complete dedication. But as he walked back toward his tower, Marcus found himself thinking not about profit margins and acquisition targets, but about Sarah's dream of a healing center where coffee was free and everyone was welcome. He thought about her grandmother's wisdom about kindness being free but priceless. He thought about the way she had transformed a crying stranger's day with nothing but human compassion. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Chun began to wonder if there might be more to success than the size of his bank account. He began to wonder if there might be more to wealth than the numbers on his financial statements. He began to wonder if the woman behind the counter at the Daily Grind, with her minimum wage job and her secondhand clothes and her dreams of healing the world, might be richer than he had ever imagined possible. The thought should have been disturbing, should have challenged everything he had built his identity around. Instead, as he pushed through the revolving doors of the Chun Financial Tower and prepared to return to his life of power and privilege, Marcus found himself smiling. Tomorrow, he decided he would go back to the Daily Grind. And maybe, just maybe, he would start asking Sarah to teach him about the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents, but in the connections we make and the kindness we share and the healing we bring to a world that desperately needs both. Marcus Chun had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize. For 15 years, he had successfully kept his business life separate from his personal life, his public persona distinct from his private thoughts, his emotional needs buried beneath layers of professional efficiency. But 3 weeks after his first visit to the Daily Grind, those carefully constructed barriers were beginning to crumble in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. He had become a regular at Sarah's coffee shop, stopping by every morning before work and sometimes again in the afternoon when the pressures of his corporate world became too much to bear. What had started as curiosity had evolved into something approaching necessity, not just for the exceptional coffee, but for the oasis of authenticity that Sarah had created in the middle of his increasingly artificial existence. The other regulars had accepted him with the casual warmth that seemed to characterize everyone in Sarah's orbit. Mr. Peterson had started sharing gardening tips, assuming that anyone who drank coffee at the Daily Grind must have at least a small appreciation for growing things. Rosa, the young mother with the temperamental toddler, had begun waving when she saw him, her stress levels visibly lower now that she knew Sarah's support was always available. Even the college students who camped out at corner tables during exam season had included him in their casual conversations about everything from philosophy to pop culture. For a man who had spent years surrounded by people who agreed with his every word because he signed their paychecks, these genuine interactions were like discovering a new sense. He found himself looking forward to debates about local politics with a retired teacher who came in every Tuesday, to hearing updates on the community garden project from an environmental activist who ordered triple shots of espresso, to simply existing in a space where his net worth was irrelevant and his humanity was what mattered. But it was Sarah herself who had become the center of this new universe he was discovering. Their conversations had grown deeper and more personal with each visit, ranging from childhood memories to philosophical discussions about purpose and meaning. She had told him about her grandmother's immigration story, about her own struggles to balance work and school, about her dreams of making a difference in people's lives. In return, he had found himself sharing things he had never told anyone: his fears about living up to his father's legacy, his loneliness despite being surrounded by people, his growing sense that he had somehow lost himself in the pursuit of success. Sarah listened without judgment, offered perspective without condescension, and somehow managed to see possibilities in him that he had forgotten existed. Under her influence, Marcus was beginning to remember the idealistic young man he had been before ambition had hardened him into someone unrecognizable. The transformation wasn't just internal. Marcus had started making changes in his business practices that would have seemed inconceivable a month earlier. He had implemented a profit-sharing program for all employees, not just executives, after Sarah had mentioned how much difference a small bonus could make in a working family's life. He had increased the company's charitable giving and started personally reviewing applications from nonprofits instead of delegating the decisions to subordinates. Most dramatically, he had begun requiring all new business partnerships to meet ethical standards that prioritized employee welfare and community impact alongside financial returns. His board of directors was beginning to express concern about these sentimental changes, but Marcus found that their approval mattered less to him with each passing day. What mattered was the look in Sarah's eyes when he told her about the scholarship fund he had established for children of service workers, or the way she smiled when he described his plan to convert unused office space into a community center. On this particular Thursday morning, Marcus arrived at the daily grind to find Sarah unusually quiet, moving through her routine with mechanical efficiency rather than her usual joyful engagement. The smile she gave him when he entered felt forced, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well. "Rough night?" he asked gently, settling onto his usual stool at the counter. Sarah's hands paused in their preparation of his coffee, and for a moment he thought she might cry. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Just some family stuff. Nothing I can't handle." But her voice lacked its usual certainty, and Marcus felt an unfamiliar surge of protective concern. Over the past few weeks, Sarah had been his anchor, his source of wisdom and stability. Seeing her vulnerable made him want to be the same kind of support for her that she had been for him. "Want to talk about it?" he offered. "I'm a pretty good listener, or so I've been told." Sarah glanced around the nearly empty shop, then made a decision. "My mom's in the hospital," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "She had a heart attack Tuesday night. She's stable now, but the doctors say she needs surgery and the insurance. God, Marcus, the insurance barely covers anything. I'm looking at medical bills that could take years to pay off, and that's if everything goes perfectly." The coffee maker hissed and gurgled as Sarah worked, but her movements were distracted now, her usual grace replaced by the jerky motions of someone trying to function while overwhelmed with worry. "The worst part is that I was supposed to start nursing school in the fall, but now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "How can I justify spending money on my education when my mom needs surgery? How can I pursue my dreams when my family needs help?" Marcus felt something twist in his chest as he watched this remarkable woman face an impossible choice between her future and her family's immediate needs. The amount of money she was talking about, probably $20,000 or $30,000, was pocket change to him, less than he spent on a single business dinner. But for Sarah, it represented years of savings, the destruction of carefully laid plans, the sacrifice of dreams for duty. "I'm so sorry," he said, the inadequacy of words feeling like a physical weight. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Sarah managed a watery smile. "Just being here to listen helps more than you know. And, hey, maybe this is the universe telling me that my timing was off, you know? Maybe I'm supposed to help my family first and worry about my own dreams later." The resigned acceptance in her voice broke something inside Marcus. Here was a woman who had spent weeks teaching him about the importance of kindness and community and taking care of each other, and when her own family needed help, she was preparing to sacrifice her future without complaint. It was exactly the kind of selfless love that she had been trying to teach him about, and seeing it in action made him understand with crystal clarity what he needed to do. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what if there's a way to take care of both? To help your mom and still pursue your education?" "You mean like winning the lottery?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Unless you've got a spare $30,000 lying around, I don't see how that's possible." Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything between them, might destroy the easy friendship they had built, but also knowing that he couldn't sit by and watch her sacrifice her dreams when he had the power to prevent it. "Actually," he said quietly, "I do." Sarah stopped moving, her hands frozen on the espresso machine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have $30,000. I have more than that. I have enough to pay for your mother's surgery, your entire nursing education, and anything else you might need." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at him with wide eyes, processing his words, and Marcus could see the exact moment when understanding dawned. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like betrayal. "Who are you?" she whispered. Marcus had dreaded this question for weeks, had known it would come eventually, but had hoped he could find a better way to tell her. Now, faced with her direct gaze and the weight of her trust, he realized there was no easy way to explain that he had been lying to her by omission since the day they met. "My name is Marcus Chun," he said slowly. "I'm a CEO and founder of Chun Financial Holdings. I'm worth about $3 billion. The coffee mug Sarah was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, sending ceramic shards and hot coffee across the tiles. She didn't seem to notice, her attention completely focused on Marcus, as if she was seeing him for the first time. $3 billion, she repeated, her voice flat and strange. "Billion. With a B." "Yes," Marcus said, feeling the word like ash in his mouth. Sarah laughed, a sound with no joy in it. Oh my God, Marcus. I've been talking to you about money troubles, about saving pennies for nursing school, about the cost of medical bills. And you're a billionaire." "Sarah, please, no." She held up a hand to stop him, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for him to follow. "Let me think. Let me just $3 billion. That's more money than I could spend in 100 lifetimes. That's more money than entire countries have. And you've been sitting in my coffee shop, drinking my coffee, listening to me worry about $20 copays and whether I can afford textbooks." The hurt in her voice was worse than anger would have been. Marcus stood up from his stool, wanting to reach for her, but knowing he had lost that right the moment his deception was revealed. "I wanted to tell you," he said desperately. "I tried to find the right way, but I was afraid you'd treat me differently. I was afraid you'd stop being yourself around me." "Stop being myself?" Sarah's voice rose, and the few customers in the shop turned to look at them with curiosity. "You mean stop being the poor girl who complains about money problems to a billionaire? Stop being the naive waitress who thinks $30,000 is an insurmountable obstacle?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it," Marcus said, but even as he spoke the words, he realized how hollow they sounded. "You're the most genuine person I've ever met. You've taught me things about life, and meaning that I never learned in all my years of business school and corporate success. I didn't want money to change that. But money changes everything, doesn't it?" Sarah said, And now she was crying, tears streaming down her face as she stared at him. Every conversation we've had, every piece of advice I've given you about finding meaning beyond wealth, every time I've talked about struggling to make ends meet, you've been sitting there knowing that you could solve all my problems with what amounts to pocket change for you. I know how this looks, Marcus said, taking a step toward her. I know it seems like I was lying to you, but I swear, Sarah, everything between us has been real. The way I feel about you, the things you've taught me, the way you've changed my perspective on what matters. None of that was about money. How can I believe that? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. How can I trust anything you've said when you've been living a lie this entire time? Do you have any idea what it's like to worry about every dollar, to calculate whether you can afford groceries and rent in the same month, to see your dreams slipping away because of circumstances beyond your control? And you've been sitting there pretending to understand when you've never worried about money a day in your adult life. The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow because it was true. Despite his emotional struggles, despite his loneliness and existential crisis, he had never experienced the grinding stress of financial insecurity. He had never had to choose between food and medicine, never had to postpone dreams because of economic necessity, never had to watch a loved one suffer because he couldn't afford to help them. You're right, he said quietly. I don't understand what that's like. I can't pretend to know what you've been going through. But I understand now, because of you, that money isn't the answer to everything. You've shown me that there are things more valuable than wealth. Have I? Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing tears across her cheeks. Because right now, money could save my mother's life and secure my future. Right now, your $3 billion could solve every problem I'm facing. So maybe I was wrong about money not being the answer to everything. Let me help you, Marcus said, desperation creeping into his voice. Let me pay for your mother's surgery, for your education, for whatever you need. Not because I pity you, not because I'm trying to buy your friendship, but because I care about you and I have the ability to make this problem go away. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her wrestling with the offer. He could see how much she wanted to say yes, how the practical part of her mind was calculating all the problems his money could solve. But he could also see something else in her eyes, something that looked like the death of innocence. And what would that make me? She asked quietly. What would I become if I let you wave your magic checkbook and make all my problems disappear? How could I ever know if I earned anything myself, if I achieved anything through my own merit, if I was anything more than another charity case for a guilty billionaire? You would still be you, Marcus insisted. You would still be the woman who showed kindness to a stranger in a park, who builds community one coffee cup at a time, who dreams of healing the world. Money doesn't change who you are at your core, doesn't it? Sarah challenged. Look what it's done to you. Look what it's done to us. 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew you. I thought you were just Marcus, a guy who worked in finance and was dealing with some stress. Now I find out you're one of the most powerful people in the country, and I don't know what's real anymore. Marcus felt his heart breaking as he watched the trust drain from Sarah's eyes. The easy friendship they had built, the growing intimacy of their conversations, the sense of mutual understanding and respect, all of it was crumbling under the weight of his deception. What do you want me to do? He asked. How do I fix this? Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring down at the broken coffee mug at her feet. When she looked up, her expression was resigned but determined. I think you should go, she said. I need time to process this, to figure out what I'm feeling. And you need to figure out who you really are when you're not pretending to be someone else. Sarah, please, go. Marcus, she said firmly. Just go. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to stay and fight for the connection they had built, wanted to somehow undo the revelation that had destroyed the fragile trust between them. But he could see in Sarah's face that she was past the point of listening, that anything he said now would only make things worse. He left money on the counter for his coffee, a $20 bill that represented both too much and not nearly enough, and walked out of the daily grind into the harsh November sunlight. Behind him, He could hear Sarah beginning to sweep up the broken ceramic, the sound of destruction being cleaned away, but not repaired. As Marcus walked back to his tower, his phone buzzed with the usual barrage of messages and notifications. Board meetings to attend, deals to close, an empire to manage. But for the first time since he had built his fortune, the demands of his business world felt completely irrelevant. He had lost something in that coffee shop that all his money couldn't buy back. He had lost the trust of the only person who had ever seen him as just Marcus, who had valued him for his humanity rather than his wealth. He had lost a friendship that had begun to teach him what it meant to be truly rich. But more than that, Marcus realized as he stood in his elevator climbing toward his office in the sky, he had lost himself again. In trying to protect the connection he had found with Sarah, he had demonstrated exactly the kind of dishonesty and manipulation that his money had taught him to see as normal. He had become the very thing that Sarah's authenticity had shown him he didn't want to be. The elevator doors opened onto his floor, revealing his assistant Rebecca waiting with a full schedule of appointments and crises that required his immediate attention. The machinery of his empire was hungry for his presence, demanding his focus, requiring him to be the Marcus Chun that the world expected, powerful, decisive, uncompromisingly successful. But as Marcus walked past Rebecca toward his office, he found himself thinking not about profit margins and acquisition targets, but about the sound of ceramic breaking and the look of betrayal in Sarah's eyes. He thought about how he had finally found something real and authentic, only to poison it with the very dishonesty that his wealth had made possible. And for the first time since he had started building his fortune, Marcus Chun wondered if he had been constructing a prison rather than an empire, wondered if all his success had been preparing him for this moment, when he would have to choose between the man he had become and the man he wanted to be. The choice, he realized, was going to cost him everything. The only question was whether he had the courage to pay that price. The decision that would change everything came to Marcus Chun at 3 in the morning on a sleepless Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after Sarah had asked him to leave the daily grind. He had been lying in his penthouse bedroom, staring at the ceiling while the city glittered below his floor-to-ceiling windows, when the full weight of what he needed to do finally crystallized in his mind with shocking clarity. For 14 days, he had tried to go back to his old life. He had attended board meetings and negotiated deals, had smiled at charity galas, and given interviews to financial publications, had performed all the rituals of being Marcus Chun, billionaire CEO. But every role felt like wearing a costume that no longer fit. Every interaction felt hollow and scripted. Every success felt meaningless without someone who cared about him rather than his bank account to share it with. He had driven past the daily grind twice, parking across the street, and watching through the windows as Sarah served her regular customers with the same warm efficiency she had always shown. She looked tired, he noticed, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she was sleeping as poorly as he was. But she was still there, still building community one coffee cup at a time, still being the person who had taught him what authentic wealth looked like. Marcus had wanted to go in, to apologize, to somehow bridge the gap that his deception had created. But he knew that words alone wouldn't repair the trust he had broken. Grand gestures and expensive gifts would only prove that he still didn't understand what Sarah had been trying to teach him. What he needed was not a gesture, but a transformation, not an apology, but a complete restructuring of who he was and how he moved through the world. Now, in the pre-dawn darkness of his empty penthouse, Marcus Chun made the most radical decision of his life. He was going to give it all away. Not just some of it, not just a generous portion that would make headlines and earn him a reputation as a philanthropist. All of it. Every stock, every bond, every real estate holding, every asset that had defined his identity for the past 15 years. He was going to systematically dismantle his empire and distribute its wealth to causes and people who would use it to heal rather than accumulate, to build community rather than concentrate power. The logistics were staggering. $3 billion in assets couldn't be given away carelessly. The tax implications alone would require teams of lawyers and accountants working around the clock. He would need to establish foundations, create oversight mechanisms, ensure that his wealth was distributed responsibly and effectively. It would take months, maybe years, to complete the process properly. But Marcus had time now, maybe for the first time in his adult life. And, more importantly, he had clarity about what he wanted his legacy to be. He started that very morning, calling an emergency meeting of his board of directors for noon. The conference room on the 41st floor had hosted hundreds of meetings over the years, most of them focused on growth, expansion, acquisition. Today, it would host a different kind of meeting entirely. The 12 men and women who comprised his board arrived with their usual efficiency, taking their places around the polished granite table with the casual confidence of people accustomed to wielding significant power. These were Marcus's hand-picked advisors, selected for their intelligence, their experience, and their absolute loyalty to the bottom line. They had helped him build his empire, had celebrated each milestone in his climb to the top of the financial world. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began once everyone had settled. I've called this emergency meeting to inform you of a decision that will fundamentally change the direction of Chun Financial Holdings. The faces around the table reflected mild curiosity. They were used to Marcus's bold moves, his willingness to take calculated risks that other CEOs might find too aggressive. They expected an announcement about a new acquisition, perhaps, or a strategic pivot into emerging markets. I'm dissolving the company, Marcus said simply. I'm liquidating all assets and distributing the proceeds to charitable organizations and individual recipients who can use the resources to create positive change in the world. The silence that followed was profound and absolute. For several seconds, no one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Then the questions began, all at once, a cacophony of disbelief and concern. Marcus, what are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? This is financial suicide. Think about your shareholders, your employees. What about your legacy? Marcus raised his hand for silence, and years of habit made the room quiet immediately. I understand your shock, he said calmly. I understand that this seems sudden and inexplicable, but I assure you, this decision has been carefully considered. David Steinberg, the oldest member of the board and Marcus's longtime mentor, leaned forward with the expression of a man trying to talk someone down from a ledge. Marcus, son, you're clearly under enormous stress. Why don't we table this discussion and reconvene when you've had time to think more clearly? My thinking has never been clearer, Marcus replied. For 15 years, I've been building wealth for its own sake, accumulating power for its own sake, competing and winning and growing bigger simply because that's what I was taught success looked like. But I've recently learned that there are other definitions of success, other ways to measure a life well lived. Margaret Torres, the board's youngest member and most aggressive strategist, couldn't contain her frustration. Other ways to measure success? Marcus, you employ 12,000 people. You've created more wealth, more opportunities, more economic growth than most people could generate in 10 lifetimes. How is destroying all of that a measure of success? Because, Marcus said quietly, none of it has made me happy. None of it has given my life meaning. None of it has created the kind of connections and community that make existence worthwhile. I've spent so long focused on having more that I forgot to ask whether what I had was making me or anyone else truly better. The room erupted in arguments again, board members talking over each other in their eagerness to change his mind. They cited fiduciary responsibility, shareholder value, his obligations to his employees, and investors. They suggested therapy, meditation retreats, extended vacations. They offered to take on more responsibilities, to free him from the daily pressures of running the company. But Marcus had heard all these arguments in his own mind over the past 2 weeks, had wrestled with every concern they were raising. He had an answer for each objection, a plan for each complication. More than that, he had a vision for what his wealth could accomplish if it was directed toward healing rather than accumulation. The employee pension fund will be fully funded and guaranteed, he said when the room finally quieted. Every worker will receive a severance package worth 2 years' salary, plus job placement assistance and retraining programs. Our clients' investments will be protected and transferred to reputable management firms. This isn't about destroying what we've built. It's about transforming it into something that serves human flourishing rather than just financial growth. "And what about you?" asked Robert Kim, the CFO who had worked beside Marcus for 8 years. "What happens to Marcus Chun when Marcus Chun no longer owns Chun Financial Holdings?" It was the question Marcus had been asking himself for 2 weeks, the question that both terrified and exhilarated him. "I become whoever I was meant to be before I decided that my net worth was the measure of my worth," he said. "I find out what Marcus Chun looks like when he's not hiding behind billions of dollars and corporate power." The meeting continued for 3 hours, with board members alternately pleading, arguing, and threatening legal action. But Marcus had anticipated every challenge, had prepared every document, had structured his plan in such a way that while they could delay the process, they couldn't ultimately stop it. Chun Financial Holdings was his company, built from the ground up with his vision and his money. If he wanted to give it all away, that was his legal right. By the end of the day, news of Marcus's decision had leaked to the financial press. By the end of the week, it was international news. The headlines ranged from admiring Billionaire's ultimate act of philanthropy to bewildered, the $3 billion nervous breakdown, to cynical, CEO's desperate publicity stunt. Financial analysts debated his motives on cable news shows. Business schools added his case to their curricula as either an inspiring example of conscious capitalism or a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing emotion with business decisions. Marcus ignored all of it. He was too busy working 18-hour days with teams of lawyers, accountants, and philanthropic advisors to pay attention to media coverage. The logistics of giving away $3 billion responsibly were more complex than building the fortune had been in the first place. Every donation had to be researched, every recipient organization had to be vetted, every distribution had to be structured to maximize positive impact while minimizing tax burdens. But Marcus found the work energizing in a way that corporate deal-making had never been. Instead of calculating how to extract maximum profit from every transaction, he was calculating how to create maximum benefit for communities and individuals who needed support. Instead of competing with other billionaires to see who could accumulate the most wealth, he was collaborating with nonprofit leaders and social entrepreneurs who shared his newfound vision of what prosperity could look like. The Daily Grind received its gift on a Thursday morning in December, 3 weeks after Marcus had begun the great dismantling of his empire. He didn't deliver it personally. He was still respecting Sarah's request for space, but sent his lawyer with documents establishing a trust fund that would cover Sarah's mother's medical expenses, pay for Sarah's nursing education, and provide operating capital for the Daily Grind to expand into the community healing center that Sarah had dreamed about. The lawyer reported back that Sarah had cried when she understood what the documents meant, but that she had also insisted on knowing whether the gift came with strings attached, expectations of gratitude, or future relationship. When assured that Marcus expected nothing in return, that this was simply one piece of a much larger redistribution of wealth, she had accepted with the same grace she brought to everything else in her life. Marcus's penthouse apartment went to a housing nonprofit that converted luxury properties into affordable units for working families. His art collection was donated to museums, his rare book collection to public libraries, his vintage car collection to vocational training programs that would use them to teach automotive repair skills to unemployed youth. Personal possessions were harder to give away than business assets. Each expensive watch, each tailored suit, each piece of furniture that cost more than most people's monthly rent represented a choice he had made about who he wanted to be perceived as. Letting go of them felt like shedding skin, painful, but ultimately liberating. The process took 6 months to complete. By the time Marcus signed the final transfer documents in June, Chun Financial Holdings no longer existed as an independent entity. Its assets had been distributed among 47 different charitable organizations, 17 educational institutions, 32 individual recipients, and hundreds of employees who found themselves with nest eggs they had never expected. Marcus himself retained only what his lawyer insisted he needed to survive: a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, enough savings to cover basic expenses for 2 years while he figured out what came next, and the clothes on his back. Everything else, every symbol of his former wealth and power, had been given away to people who could use it to build rather than accumulate, to heal rather than compete, to create community rather than concentrate privilege. The transformation wasn't just financial. As his empire disappeared, so did the protective barriers that wealth had created around him. He no longer traveled in private cars or ate at exclusive restaurants. He no longer had assistants managing his schedule or security teams ensuring his privacy. He no longer commanded rooms simply by walking into them or received deference simply because of his net worth. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus Chun was just another person navigating the world with his own resources and abilities. The experience was simultaneously humbling and exhilarating. Every interaction required genuine engagement rather than the performance of power. Every relationship had to be built on mutual interest and respect rather than the implicit promise of financial benefit. He took a job at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated individuals find employment and housing. The work paid $38,000 a year, less than he used to spend on a single business dinner, but it offered something that all his wealth had never provided: the satisfaction of knowing that his daily efforts were making concrete improvements in people's lives. His colleagues at the nonprofit knew about his background. The story of the billionaire who had given everything away was too famous to hide, but they treated him with the casual camaraderie of coworkers rather than the calculated deference of employees or business partners. He was valued for his work ethic and his willingness to take on difficult cases, not for his ability to write large checks or provide access to powerful networks. The apartment he rented was in the same neighborhood as the daily grind, though he was careful to take routes that wouldn't bring him past Sarah's shop. He wasn't hiding from her exactly, but he wanted to give her the space she had asked for, wanted to prove that his transformation wasn't a performance designed to win her back, but a genuine restructuring of who he was and how he wanted to live. On a warm evening in late June, almost exactly 8 months after their first encounter in Central Park, Marcus was walking home from work when he saw Sarah coming out of a bookstore half a block ahead of him. She was carrying a stack of textbooks that looked heavy enough to require both arms, and she was wearing scrubs that suggested she had been at the hospital, probably visiting her mother or perhaps already starting her clinical rotations. For a moment, Marcus considered crossing the street or ducking into a nearby cafe to avoid an encounter he wasn't sure either of them was ready for. But something Sarah had taught him about authenticity and courage made him continue walking forward. When she looked up and saw him approaching, her expression cycled through surprise, uncertainty, and something that might have been cautious hope. "Marcus," she said when they were close enough to speak without raising their voices. "How are you?" "I'm good," he replied, and realized he meant it in a way he never had when he was wealthy. "Really good. How's your mother?" "She's doing well, thanks to you," Sarah said, and there was no resentment in her voice now, only gratitude and a lingering question. "The surgery was successful. Her recovery has been smooth, and the doctors say she should be back to normal within a few months." "I'm glad," Marcus said. "And nursing school? How's that going?" Sarah's face lit up with the same joy he remembered from their conversations at the daily grind. "It's incredible, challenging and exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but incredible. I'm learning so much about healing, about how to be present with people during their most vulnerable moments. It's exactly what I dreamed it would be." They stood there for a moment in the golden evening light. Two people who had shared something profound but complicated, uncertain how to navigate the space between their past connection and their present circumstances. "I heard about what you did," Sarah said quietly. "With your company, your money, everything. People are calling it the most radical act of philanthropy in modern history." "People are calling it a lot of things," Marcus said with a wry smile. some of them less flattering than that. Was it worth it? Sarah asked, and Marcus could hear in her voice the same genuine curiosity that had characterized all their conversations, the same willingness to really listen to his answer. Marcus thought about the question seriously, considering everything he had given up and everything he had gained. He thought about the loneliness of his penthouse and the camaraderie of his nonprofit office. He thought about the hollow victories of corporate conquest and the daily satisfaction of helping someone find housing or employment. He thought about the isolation of wealth and the connection that came from sharing genuine struggles and authentic relationships. Yes, he said without hesitation. It was worth it. I'm happier now than I ever was when I had billions of dollars. I'm more myself now than I ever was when I was trying to be someone important. I'm richer now in every way that actually matters. Sarah studied his face with those perceptive brown eyes that had seen through his mask from the very beginning. You look different, she said. Not just the clothes or the haircut, though those are different too. You look lighter somehow, like you've been carrying a weight and finally put it down. That's exactly what it feels like, Marcus admitted. For years, I thought that weight was success, that carrying it made me strong and important. It took meeting you to realize it was actually holding me back from everything I really wanted. And what do you really want? Sarah asked, the same question she had posed to him months ago in her coffee shop, back when he was still pretending to be someone he wasn't. But now Marcus had an answer, one that had been forged through months of stripping away everything false and discovering what remained when only truth was left. I want to be useful, he said. I want to contribute something meaningful to the world. I want to build relationships based on who I am rather than what I have. I want to wake up every morning knowing that my life has purpose beyond accumulating more of whatever I'm already accumulating. Sarah smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after a long, difficult night. Those are good wants, she said. Important wants. What about you? Marcus asked, what do you want now that you're becoming the healer you always dreamed of being? I want to keep learning, Sarah said. I want to keep growing. I want to keep building the kind of community where everyone feels valued and supported. And someday, when I've learned enough and saved enough, I still want to open that healing center we talked about. The one where coffee is free and everyone is welcome. Marcus asked, remembering her dream. The one where coffee is free and everyone is welcome, Sarah confirmed. They talked for another 20 minutes, standing on the sidewalk as the evening deepened around them. They talked about Sarah's studies, about Marcus's new job, about the books she was reading, and the cases he was working on. They talked about the community garden that had been planted in the lot next to the Daily Grind, funded partly by the trust Marcus had established, and the way it had become a gathering place for neighbors who might never have met otherwise. It was the kind of conversation they used to have over coffee, natural and engaging and mutually nourishing. But now it carried an additional dimension of authenticity that hadn't been possible when Marcus was hiding his identity. Now there were no secrets between them, no fundamental dishonesty underlying their connection. Now they could meet as equals, two people trying to build meaningful lives and make positive contributions to the world. When they finally parted ways, Sarah touched his arm gently. I'm proud of you, she said. What you did took incredible courage. Not everyone would have been brave enough to give up everything they thought they wanted in order to discover who they really are. I learned it from you, Marcus replied. You showed me what real courage looks like, what authentic wealth looks like, what it means to be truly rich in the things that matter. As Sarah walked away into the gathering dusk, her textbooks balanced against her hip and her scrubs rustling with each step, Marcus stood for a moment in the warm June air and took inventory of his life. He had no money, no power, no status in the eyes of the world that had once bowed to his will. He had a modest apartment, a meaningful job, and the kind of authentic relationships he had never known were possible. And he had never been happier. The man who had once controlled billions of dollars and commanded corporate empires was gone, dismantled as completely as the financial holdings that had defined him. In his place was someone simpler but infinitely more valuable, Marcus Chun, human being, learning to measure his worth not in dollars and cents, but in kindness shared, communities built, and lives touched with genuine care. It was, he realized as he continued his walk home through the neighborhood, he now truly belonged to the richest he had ever been. 2 years later, on a crisp October morning that painted the leaves in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus Chin stood in front of a building that would have been unremarkable to most passersby, but represented the culmination of the most important journey of his life. The sign above the entrance read Haven Community Healing Center in simple, elegant letters, and through the large windows, he could see people moving purposefully through what had once been an abandoned warehouse and was now something extraordinary. The transformation of the building was nothing short of miraculous. Where there had once been empty concrete and broken windows, there was now a space that hummed with life and possibility. The interior had been designed with warmth and accessibility in mind. Comfortable seating areas where people could have conversations or simply exist in community, private rooms for counseling and medical consultations, a commercial kitchen that filled the air with the scent of fresh bread and brewing coffee, and in the center of it all, a cafe area where baristas worked with the kind of passionate attention that Marcus had first witnessed at the Daily Grind. Sarah emerged from behind the service counter, and the sight of her took Marcus's breath away, just as it had that very first morning when she had offered him a hug in Central Park. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in the practical style of someone who had important work to do, but she radiated the same warmth and authenticity that had drawn him to her from the beginning. The difference was that now she was clearly in her element, moving through her dream, made manifest with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to contribute to the world. "Marcus," she said, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing him. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied, looking around the space with amazement. "Sarah, this is incredible. You've created something truly special here." The Haven Community Healing Center was the fulfillment of the dreams Sarah had shared with him during one of their early conversations at the Daily Grind. But it had evolved into something even more comprehensive than either of them had originally envisioned. The center offered traditional medical services through a partnership with the local community health clinic, mental health counseling provided by graduate students completing their clinical hours, job training programs for people transitioning out of difficult circumstances, and educational workshops on everything from financial literacy to nutrition to parenting skills. But what made the center truly unique was its foundational philosophy that healing happened in community, that no one should have to face their struggles alone, and that everyone, regardless of their economic circumstances, deserved access to care, support, and hope. The coffee was indeed free, as Sarah had always dreamed, and the doors were open to anyone who needed what the center offered. "The grand opening isn't until this afternoon," Sarah explained as she gave Marcus a tour of the facility, "but I wanted you to see it before the crowds arrived. I know you've been following our progress, but experiencing it in person is different." Marcus had indeed been following the center's development with intense interest, though from a respectful distance. After their encounter on the sidewalk 2 years earlier, he and Sarah had gradually rebuilt their friendship on a foundation of complete honesty and mutual respect. They met for coffee occasionally, sometimes at the Daily Grind, which Sarah still owned and operated, sometimes at other neighborhood establishments, and their conversations had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than either the mentorship of their early relationship or the complicated dynamic that had followed his revelation of wealth. They had become true friends, two people who valued each other's perspectives and supported each other's growth. Marcus had been a sounding board as Sarah developed her vision for the Healing Center, offering insights from his business background when she asked for them, but never presuming to direct or control her process. Sarah had been a source of wisdom and encouragement as Marcus navigated his new life, helping him understand the difference between serving others and serving his own need to feel important through service. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked as they walked through the main gathering space, where comfortable couches and Chairs were arranged in clusters that encouraged conversation while still allowing for privacy. To see your dream realized like this? Sarah paused, her expression thoughtful. Overwhelming, she said honestly. Exciting. Terrifying. All at once. For so long, this was just an idea, something I thought about when I was making coffee at 5 in the morning or studying for exams late at night. Now it's real, and people are depending on it, and I have this responsibility to make sure it actually helps rather than just making me feel good about myself. You'll be amazing, Marcus said with complete confidence. This place, what you've created here, it's exactly what the world needs. It's healing and community and hope all wrapped up together. The tour continued through the various areas of the center. In the medical clinic, Marcus met Dr. Jennifer Hassan, a family physician who had left a lucrative private practice to become the center's medical director because she believed healthcare should be a human right rather than a privilege. In the counseling offices, he was introduced to a team of therapists and social workers who specialized in trauma-informed care and community-based healing approaches. The job training center was particularly impressive, with workshop areas equipped for teaching everything from computer skills to plumbing to culinary arts. The instructors were a mix of volunteers and paid staff, many of them people who had once been clients of similar programs and now wanted to pass on the opportunities they had received. We've already placed 47 people in permanent employment, Sarah explained as they watched a welding class in progress. And that's before we're even officially open. The demand is incredible, but so is the community support. People want to be part of something that's making a real difference. But it was the cafe area that moved Marcus most deeply. The baristas working behind the counter moved with the same purposeful grace that Sarah had always brought to coffee preparation. And the customers, some clearly struggling financially, others obviously well off, most somewhere in between, sat together in the kind of easy integration that Marcus had learned to recognize as Sarah's particular genius for building community. Coffee really is free? Marcus asked, watching a young mother with 3 small children receive not just drinks, but fresh pastries and patient assistance finding a table large enough for her family. Coffee is free, basic medical care is free, counseling is free, job training is free, Sarah confirmed. We never want cost to be a barrier to someone getting what they need. Obviously, we accept donations from people who can afford to contribute, and we have grants and fundraising events. But no one ever gets turned away because they can't pay. Marcus shook his head in amazement. How do you make the economics work? Sarah smiled, the expression carrying echoes of the conversations they used to have about money and what really mattered. We make them work because we have to, she said. Because there are too many people who need what we offer for us to worry about traditional business models. Because sometimes the most important things can't be measured in profit margins. As they completed the tour and returned to the main gathering area, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them both to this moment. 2 years earlier, he had been a man who measured everything in terms of return on investment, who believed that value could be quantified and that success meant accumulation. Now he was standing in a space that represented the complete opposite philosophy, that some things were too important to price, that true wealth was measured in community and connection and care. I have something for you, Marcus said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. A grand opening gift. Sarah accepted the envelope with curiosity, opening it to find a single sheet of paper. As she read, her eyes widened with surprise and then filled with tears. Marcus, she whispered, I can't accept this. The document was a deed transferring ownership of the building that housed the Healing Center from the nonprofit foundation that had purchased it to Sarah personally. The foundation would continue to operate and fund the center's programs, but Sarah would own the physical space outright, ensuring that the Haven Community Healing Center would never be at risk of losing its home to rising rents or changing ownership. You can and you should, Marcus said gently. This is your vision, your dream, your life's work. You should have the security of knowing that it can't be taken away from you. But this building is worth at least $2 million, Sarah protested. How can you afford something like this? Marcus smiled, remembering how much their understanding of wealth and value had both evolved since their first conversations. I can afford it because I learned from the best teacher in the world that wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you can give. This gift doesn't make me poorer. It makes me richer in every way that counts. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture that took Marcus back to that first morning when she had offered comfort to a crying stranger. You know what this means to me? To everyone who will be helped by this place. I know what it means to me, Marcus replied. It means that the most important lesson I ever learned, that kindness is free but priceless, will have a permanent home in the world. The afternoon grand opening celebration was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. The community turned out in force. Neighbors and local business owners, city council members and state representatives, social workers and teachers and clergy, families who had already been helped by the center's programs, and individuals who hoped to benefit from them in the future. Marcus stayed in the background for most of the event, content to watch Sarah in her element as she welcomed visitors, explained the center's mission, and graciously accepted congratulations from the hundreds of people who had come to show their support. This was her day, her triumph, her dream made real through years of hard work and unwavering commitment to serving others. But toward the end of the celebration, as the crowd began to thin and the autumn sun slanted low through the windows, Sarah found him standing quietly in a corner and approached with 2 cups of the center signature coffee. "Hiding?" she asked with a teasing smile. "Observing," Marcus corrected, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Watching you create magic." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the remaining visitors explore the space and connect with staff members. Children ran between the tables, their laughter adding to the joyful chaos. Elderly folks sat in the comfortable chairs, many of them clearly planning to make the center part of their daily routine. Young adults clustered around the job training information table, hope visible on their faces as they learned about opportunities that might change their lives. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked quietly. "The money, the power, the life you had before?" Marcus considered the question seriously, as he always did when Sarah asked him something important. "I miss some things," he said honestly. "I miss being able to solve problems instantly with a checkbook. I miss the efficiency of having other people handle all the mundane details of existence. I miss the security of knowing I could weather any financial crisis without worry." "But," Sarah prompted, sensing there was more. "But I don't miss being lonely," Marcus continued. "I don't miss feeling like every relationship was transactional, like people only cared about me because of what I could do for them. I don't miss the constant pressure to accumulate more, to grow bigger, to win at everything regardless of who got hurt in the process. Most of all, I don't miss feeling empty despite having everything I thought I wanted." Sarah nodded, her understanding evident in her expression. "And now? Now I wake up every morning knowing that my work matters, that I'm contributing something meaningful to the world. Now I have friends who value me for who I am rather than what I own. Now when I help someone, it's because I care about them, not because it makes me look good or serve some strategic purpose." Marcus paused, looking around the healing center with obvious pride. "Now I get to be part of something like this, something that will outlast me and make the world a little bit better long after I'm gone." "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "you've taught me as much as I ever taught you. Such as, that wealth isn't evil in itself. It's what we do with it that matters. That privilege becomes toxic only when we use it to separate ourselves from others rather than to lift others up. That sometimes the most radical thing a person can do is give up the thing that society tells them makes them valuable and discover what actually does." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "We make a good team," he said. "The former billionaire and the healer, learning from each other how to be truly rich." "Speaking of which," Sarah said with a mischievous glint in her eye, "I have a proposition for you." "Oh." "The center needs a director of community outreach, someone to help us build partnerships with other organizations, develop new programs, maybe even help us expand to other locations someday. The pay would be modest, but the work would be meaningful. And you'd be working with me every day, which might be either a blessing or a curse depending on your perspective. Marcus felt his heart leap at the possibility not just of meaningful work, but of daily collaboration with the woman who had become his closest friend and wisest counselor. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to help build something beautiful," Sarah corrected. "Something that could change hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. Something that started with a simple question asked by someone brave enough to offer a hug to a stranger." The circle was closing, Marcus realized. The journey that had begun with Sarah's compassion in Central Park was leading them back to each other, but now as equals, as partners, as two people who had learned what it meant to measure wealth and love given and received rather than dollars accumulated. "I think you need a hug," Sarah said softly, echoing the words that had started everything. "May I?" "Yes," Marcus replied without hesitation, and stepped into her embrace. This time, there were no tears, no desperation, no sense of a man drowning in his own success. This time, there was only the quiet joy of two people who had found their purpose and chosen to pursue it together. This time, the hug was not about comfort in crisis, but about celebration of dreams realized and communities built and the profound wealth that came from dedicating one's life to service. As they held each other in the gathering dusk of the Healing Center's first day, surrounded by the lingering energy of hundreds of people who had come to witness the birth of hope made tangible, Marcus Chin knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. He had started the journey as a billionaire who had everything money could buy, but nothing that actually mattered. He was ending it as a man with very little money, but with something far more valuable, the knowledge that his life had meaning, that his work made a difference, that he was surrounded by people who valued him for who he was rather than what he owned. The question Sarah had asked him in the park, "I think I need a hug, may I?" had cost him everything he thought he wanted and given him everything he never knew he needed. It had led him away from the isolation of wealth and toward the true riches of community, connection, and purpose. Standing in the Haven Community Healing Center, holding the woman whose simple act of kindness had changed his entire life, Marcus Chun finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. It wasn't about the size of your bank account or the power of your position or the number of people who answered to you. It was about the number of people you could help heal. It was about the communities you could build and the hope you could offer and the love you could share. It was about waking up every morning knowing that your life mattered, not because of what you had accumulated, but because of what you had given away. It was about discovering that the richest person in the world was not the one who had the most money, but the one who had learned how to transform resources, whether financial or emotional or spiritual, into healing for others. And by that measure, Marcus Chun had never been wealthier in his life. The billionaire was gone, dismantled as completely as his financial empire. In his place was something infinitely more valuable, a healer, a community builder, a man who had learned that the most expensive things in life, love, connection, purpose, hope, could never be bought, only earned through the patient, daily practice of caring for others. The true measure of his wealth was not in the billions he had given away, but in a healing center that would serve the community for generations to come. Not in the empire he had built, but in the lives that would be transformed by the simple revolutionary idea that everyone deserved care, support, and hope. Not in what he had accumulated, but in what he had learned to give. And by that measure, Marcus Chun was the richest man in the world.